Hey, what's up, you guys? It's me, and today, oh boy, today we are diving into something seriously dark. Like, I was researching this and I had to take breaks, multiple breaks. We're talking about history, but not the kind you see in feel-good documentaries. This is the stuff that lurks in the shadows, the things that make you question humanity. And honestly, it's kind of terrifying to think these things were real. I'm not gonna lie, my stomach is already doing flips just thinking about what we're about to get into. Now, I know what you're thinking, Factomania. Why are we doing this? This sounds awful. And yeah, it is. But there's this morbid curiosity, right? This need to understand the extremes, the absolute worst things people have done. It's like, by looking at this darkness, maybe we appreciate the light a little more? Or maybe we're all just a little messed up and drawn to the macabre. Either way, we're in this together now. I'm going to walk you through some of the most horrifying inventions ever created by humankind. These aren't props from a horror movie, these were actual tools of pain and suffering. So consider this your major trigger warning. Warning, what you're about to see is not for the faint of heart. These are the creepiest torture devices ever used in history. If you're squeamish or if this kind of content is too much, click away now, no judgment. For the rest of you, well, buckle up, because things are about to get incredibly disturbing. Let's just start. Oh my God. Okay, first up, and this one is like iconic in the worst way possible, is the Iron Maiden. Just the name itself sends chills down my spine, doesn't it? Imagine a human-sized coffin, but it's not for a peaceful rest. Oh no. This thing was lined, completely lined, with these long, sharp iron spikes. And the whole point was for you to be placed inside, standing up, and then they'd slowly, ever so slowly, close the doors on you. Can you even begin to comprehend that? The spikes wouldn't kill you instantly. That would be too merciful, I guess, for the sick minds that came up with this. No, these spikes were strategically placed to miss vital organs, at least at first. So as those heavy doors creaked shut, you'd feel them piercing your skin, your flesh, from every direction. It was a slow, agonizing impalement while you were still very much alive, conscious and screaming. They'd often leave people in there for days, bleeding out in unimaginable pain, sometimes with little viewing windows so people could watch. The psychological terror on top of the physical agony. I can't even. It's like something straight out of a horror film, but it was real. This is just number one, you guys. I'm already regretting this. All right, next on this horrifying list is the rack. And if the Iron Maiden was about piercing, the rack was all about stretching, like literally stretching a human body until it just broke. It sounds so simple, almost crude, but the effectiveness of its cruelty is just wow. They would tie the victim's wrists and ankles to these rollers at opposite ends of a wooden frame, and then slowly, methodically, the torturer would turn these handles, increasing the tension, pulling the limbs in opposite directions. At first it would be just intense pain, muscles screaming, but they wouldn't stop there. Oh no, they'd keep turning, and you'd hear these sickening pops and cracks as your joints started to dislocate. Shoulders, elbows, hips, knees. Imagine that feeling, that sound coming from your own body. And if they kept going, which they often did, your limbs would literally be torn from their sockets. The sheer brutality of it, the deliberate escalating agony. It's designed to break not just the body, but the spirit. This was a common one for getting confessions, true or false, because who wouldn't say anything to make that stop? Okay, this one is particularly messed up, even for this list. It's called the Brazen Bull, or sometimes the Sicilian Bull. Picture this, a life-sized, hollow statue of a bull, cast entirely out of bronze. Sounds like a weird piece of art, right? Wrong. So wrong. There was a door on the side, and the victim was forced inside this metal beast. Then they'd light a fire underneath it. The bronze would heat up, turning the inside of the bull into an oven, literally roasting the person alive. But here's the part that gets even more twisted, if that's even possible. The bull was designed with this intricate system of tubes and pipes leading from the inside to its mouth. So, as the victim inside was screaming in unimaginable agony from being cooked alive, their screams would travel through these tubes and be transformed. They would come out of the bull's mouth sounding like the bellowing of an actual bull. The inventor, Perillos of Athens, supposedly presented it to a tyrant named Phalaris, thinking he'd be rewarded. Instead, Phalaris, horrified by the cruelty, allegedly had Perillos himself be the first victim. Talk about karma, but still, the concept is pure evil. Chapter 4, Judas Cradle, the slow impalement. All right, brace yourselves again, because the Judas Cradle is it's just awful. This device wasn't about quick pain necessarily, it was about prolonged, humiliating and excruciating suffering. Imagine a pyramid-shaped seat, like a really sharp, pointed stool made of wood or metal. The victim, usually naked, would be suspended above it by ropes, and then very, very slowly, they would be lowered onto the point of this pyramid. The point was designed to impale them, usually in the anus, perineum, or for women, the vagina. The sheer weight of their own body would do the work, forcing the point deeper and deeper. Sometimes they'd add weights to the victim's legs to speed it up, or rather to intensify the agony. Because it was so slow, it could prolong the torture for hours, even days. The pain would be unimaginable. And on top of that, the risk of infection from the unhygienic device, if you even survived the initial impalement, was huge. It was designed to cause maximum suffering and degradation. The name itself, Judas Cradle, implies betrayal and a horrific end. I can't imagine the terror. Chapter 5. The Pear of Anguish, ripping you apart from the inside. Okay, this one is called the Pear of Anguish, or sometimes choke pear, and the name alone is unsettling, but the reality is so much worse. It was a pear-shaped metal device, usually with 3 or 4 segments or petals that were hinged at the top. This thing was inserted into one of the victim's orifices, typically the mouth for blasphemers or liars, the anus for homosexuals, or the vagina for women accused of adultery or causing a miscarriage. Once inside, the torturer would turn a screw at the base. As the screw turned, the segments of the pear would slowly, agonizingly expand, opening up inside the cavity. It would stretch the flesh, then tear it, mutilating the victim from the inside out. You can imagine the damage this would do. In the mouth, it would break teeth, shatter the jaw. In other places, well, it would cause catastrophic internal injuries, massive bleeding, and an agonizing death. The sheer visceral horror of being ripped apart from within is just... it's on another level of cruelty. The fact that someone sat down and designed this, engineered it for this specific purpose, it's truly chilling. Chapter 6. Scaphism, eaten alive by insects. All right, if you thought the metal devices were bad, get ready for scaphism. This is an ancient Persian form of torture, and it's so uniquely horrifying it almost sounds like something out of a myth, but nope, it was real. It's also known as the boats, and here's why. The victim would be placed between 2 narrow rowboats, or sometimes a hollowed-out tree trunk with their head, hands and feet sticking out. They were essentially trapped in this wooden shell. Then the truly disgusting part began. They would force-feed the person milk and honey to the point of inducing severe diarrhea. And then they would pour more milk and honey all over the exposed parts of their body, especially their face, to attract insects. They'd then leave the victim out in the sun, often in a swampy area, just marinating. The combination of the filth from their own body and the sweet coating would attract swarms of insects, flies, wasps, beetles, ants. These insects would bite, sting, and burrow into their flesh, laying eggs and literally eating the person alive over days, sometimes weeks. It was a slow, agonizing, septic death. The sheer prolonged torment is just unthinkable. Chapter 7. The Breaking Wheel, a symphony of shattered bones. Next up is the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel. This was a particularly brutal form of public execution, and it's as gruesome as it sounds. The victim would be tied, spread-eagled to a large wooden cartwheel. Sometimes their limbs were threaded through the spokes. Then the executioner, armed with a heavy iron bar or sometimes a hammer, would systematically smash their bones. They'd start with the shins, then the thighs, then the arms, forearm, upper arm, each blow delivered with crushing force. The goal wasn't to kill quickly. Oh no, the idea was to inflict the maximum number of bone fractures while keeping the victim alive. They'd often be careful to avoid fatal blows to the head or chest initially. After their limbs were just a mangled mess of shattered bone and torn flesh, the victim, still alive and in unimaginable agony, would sometimes be woven through the spokes of the wheel, or the wheel would be hoisted onto a tall pole. They'd be left there, exposed to the elements, for birds to peck at, to slowly die from shock, dehydration, or their horrific injuries, often over several days. It was a spectacle of suffering. Chapter 8. The Spanish Tickler, tearing flesh to the bone. Okay, the name Spanish tickler sounds almost playful, doesn't it? Like some kind of weird novelty item, but trust me, there is nothing playful about this. It was a horrific instrument of torture, essentially an extension of the torturer's own hand, but made of sharp, curved iron claws like a demonic cat's paw. This device was used to literally tear flesh from the victim's body. Any part of the body was fair game: arms, legs, chest, back, even the face. The torturer would drag these sharp claws across the skin, ripping through muscle, tendons, sometimes all the way down to the bone. Can you imagine the searing pain, the feeling of your own body being shredded piece by piece? It was designed to inflict excruciating pain and leave horrific, disfiguring wounds. Often it wasn't even meant to kill directly, but to coerce confessions, or just as a form of sadistic punishment. The blood loss, the shock, the inevitable infections from such grievous wounds often led to a slow, agonizing death. Anyway, the casual cruelty in the name versus the reality is chilling. Chapter 9. The Heretic's Fork, Silencing with Pain. This next one, The Heretic's Fork, is a bit different. It wasn't necessarily about extreme physical mutilation in the same way as some others, but it was about prolonged discomfort, pain, and psychological control. It was a metal rod, usually iron, with two opposing bi-pronged forks at each end. One set of prongs was placed under the victim's chin, digging into the flesh, and the other set rested against their sternum or sometimes the upper neck, depending on the design. A strap would then be buckled around the victim's neck, holding this thing tightly in place. The effect: the victim couldn't move their head, not up, not down, not side to side. If they tried to lower their head, even slightly, perhaps from exhaustion, the prongs under their chin would dig deeper into their throat. If they tried to speak or even nod, the prongs would pierce their flesh. It forced them into a position of constant, agonizing vigilance. Sleep was impossible. It was often used on those accused of heresy, hence the name, to prevent them from speaking or recanting their crimes in any way that wasn't approved. It's a more subtle but deeply cruel form of torture, designed to break the will through relentless, inescapable pain and deprivation. Chapter 10. Rat Torture, a Burrowing Nightmare. Okay, if you have a fear of rats, you might want to skip this one. Seriously. Rat torture is the stuff of actual nightmares, and it's been used in various horrifying forms throughout history. One of the most well-known methods involved placing a metal cage, open on one side, onto the victim's bare stomach or chest. This cage would then be filled with several large, hungry rats. The open side of the cage would be pressed firmly against the victim's skin. Then the torturers would apply heat to the top of the metal cage, maybe hot coals or a torch. The rats, trapped inside and desperate to escape the rising heat, would have only one way out: down. They would start to claw and gnaw their way the victim's body, burrowing through flesh and organs to escape the heat. Can you even imagine the sheer terror and agony of feeling rats, driven mad by heat and hunger, eating their way inside you while you're conscious? It's beyond horrific. The psychological torment alone, knowing what was happening, would be unbearable. This is just pure sadistic evil. Chapter 11. Thumbscrews, crushing digits, crushing wills. All right, let's talk about thumbscrews. This device is small, almost deceptively simple, but capable of inflicting unimaginable pain. It consisted of a metal clamp, often with ridges or studs on the inside surfaces, where the victim's thumbs, fingers, or sometimes even toes would be placed. Then a screw mechanism would be tightened, slowly, progressively crushing the digits. It sounds straightforward, but the pain would be immediate and excruciating. As the screw turned, the pressure would build. First, the flesh would be compressed, then the bones would begin to crack, then splinter, and eventually be completely crushed into a pulp. The torturer could control the pace, drawing out the agony, asking questions between turns of the screw. It was a very effective way to get information or a confession, because the pain was so intense and localized. Even if the victim survived and was released, Their hands or feet would often be permanently maimed, useless. It's a reminder that torture doesn't always have to be elaborate to be absolutely devastating. Chapter 12. Iron Boot, a fiery, crushing embrace. Next up is the iron boot, or Spanish boot. This one is just as nasty as it sounds. Imagine a casing for the foot and lower leg made of iron or sometimes wood reinforced with iron bands. The victim's leg would be placed inside this boot. Then, the real horror began in one of several ways. Sometimes wooden wedges would be hammered between the boot and the leg, progressively tightening around the limb, crushing the flesh and bone. Each strike of the hammer would send waves of agony through the victim. Another, even more horrific variation involved the boot being filled with boiling water, hot oil, or even molten lead before or after the victim's foot was placed inside. Or the boot itself could be heated over a fire with the foot already inside. The combination of intense heat, causing horrific burns, and the crushing pressure as the metal contracted or wedges were driven in would shatter bones and cook the flesh. The goal was to cripple, to inflict unbearable pain, and to leave the victim permanently disfigured if they even survived. It's just a symphony of pain. Chapter 13, the crocodile shears, a most horrific mutilation. Okay, the name crocodile shears is already terrifying, and this device was designed for a very specific and incredibly gruesome purpose. These were large, heavy iron tongs, shaped somewhat like a crocodile's snout with sharp, serrated teeth on the inside. They were primarily used, or so it's claimed, to punish those guilty of regicide, attempting to kill a king, or sometimes other severe crimes. And the method of punishment was genital mutilation. These shears would be heated until they were red hot. Then they would be used to clamp onto the victim's penis. The serrated edges, combined with the searing heat, would grip and burn the flesh, and then, with a violent pull or twisting motion, the penis would be torn from the body. The agony is unimaginable. The burning, the tearing, the catastrophic blood loss, the psychological trauma. It was designed not just to inflict pain, but to utterly humiliate and emasculate the victim before a likely agonizing death from shock or infection. This is one of those devices that just makes you feel sick to your stomach thinking about it. Chapter 14, Saw Torture, a Slow Vertical Demise. Alright, this next one is saw torture, and it's exactly as horrifying as it sounds. It was a method of execution, and it was designed to be slow, agonizing, and a public spectacle. The victim would typically be hung upside down with their legs spread apart and secured. Being upside down was crucial as it ensured blood would rush to the head, keeping them conscious for longer during the horrific process that was about to unfold. Then two executioners, one on each side, would begin to saw the victim in half, vertically, starting at the groin. They would use a large two-man saw. Because the victim was upside down, they would remain conscious through a significant portion of this unimaginably painful bisection. They would feel every rasp of the saw as it tore through their flesh, muscle, and bone. It was a slow, methodical, and incredibly cruel way to die, designed to maximize suffering and terror. The imagery alone is just absolutely nightmarish. Title: The Iron Chair, Spiked Seating of Agony. Next we have the iron chair, sometimes called the chair of torture. This is another one of those devices whose simplicity belies its cruelty. Imagine an ordinary-looking chair, but it's made entirely of iron, and every surface that would touch the victim's body. The seat, the backrest, the armrests is covered in hundreds of sharp iron spikes. The victim would be forcibly strapped into this chair, naked, so the spikes would press directly into their flesh from all sides. Just the act of being restrained in this chair would be agonizing, with every slight movement causing the spikes to dig deeper, but of course it often didn't stop there. Sometimes the chair would be heated from underneath. The iron would become scorching hot, burning the victim while the spikes simultaneously pierced their skin. They could be left in this state for hours, even days, enduring unimaginable pain, blood loss, and the terror of being completely immobilized in such an agonizing contraption. It was designed to break people, both physically and mentally. Chapter 16, The Coffin Torture, Public Death in a Cage. The coffin torture, also known as living in the cage, was a particularly cruel and drawn-out form of punishment and public humiliation. The victim was locked inside a metal cage, roughly shaped like a human body, but often made deliberately too small, forcing them into a cramped, uncomfortable position. This coffin would then be suspended from a gallows, a tree, or the walls of a castle in full public view. There, exposed to the elements, the scorching sun, freezing cold, rain, snow, the victim was left to die a slow, agonizing death. This could take days, even weeks. They would suffer from starvation, thirst, exposure, and the constant discomfort of their confinement. Often wild animals or birds would peck at their flesh while they were still alive. The public nature of this torture was key. It served as a gruesome warning to others. Can you imagine that slow descent into madness and death, all while being a spectacle for a jeering crowd? It's a truly horrifying fate. The lead sprinkler, a shower of molten pain. This one, the lead sprinkler, sounds almost benign, like a garden tool. But you guys, it was anything but. It was a hollow iron or silver sphere, or sometimes a ladle-like device with small holes in it attached to a handle. This sprinkler would be filled with molten lead, boiling oil, scalding water, or even acid. The torturer would then hold it over the victim and let the burning liquid drip or sprinkle out through the holes onto their exposed skin. The pain would be instantaneous and excruciating. Molten metal or boiling oil would cause horrific deep burns, searing the flesh on contact. It could be used on any part of the body, often targeting sensitive areas like the eyes, stomach, or back. Sometimes it was used to encourage confessions, with each sprinkle a fresh wave of agony. The sheer sadism of slowly dripping burning liquid onto someone. It's a level of cruelty that's hard to fathom. The scars, both physical and psychological, would be devastating, assuming the victim even survived. The knee splitter, crushing joints with spikes. The knee splitter, just the name tells you this is going to be bad. This device was designed, quite simply, to destroy a person's knees. It typically consisted of 2 wooden or metal blocks lined with sharp spikes. Sometimes just a few large ones, sometimes many smaller, sharper points. The victim's knee would be placed between these 2 blocks. Then, using a screw mechanism, the blocks would be slowly tightened, driving the spikes deep into the knee from both sides. The pain would be immediate and unbearable. As the blocks were tightened further, the spikes would penetrate deeper, shattering the kneecap, tearing ligaments and cartilage, and crushing the bones of the joint. It was designed to permanently cripple the victim. Sometimes it was used to extract confessions, the torturer tightening the screw turn by agonizing turn. Even if the pressure was released, the knee would be a mangled ruin. The thought of your knees, so vital for movement, being deliberately and systematically destroyed like this is just sickening. Okay, this is the head crusher, and it does exactly what its horrifying name suggests. This device consisted of a metal cap that was placed over the top of the victim's head and a chin rest or plate below their jaw. These 2 parts were connected by a large screw. As the torturer slowly turned this screw, the cap would be forced downwards, compressing the skull. The pressure would build relentlessly. First, the victim's teeth would shatter in their sockets, then their jaw would break. As the pressure increased, their eyes would literally be squeezed from their sockets. The skull would begin to crack and splinter under the immense force. And finally, if the torturer continued, the brain itself would be forced out through the fractured skull and eye sockets. It was an incredibly brutal and agonizing way to die, or to be left horrifically maimed if the process was stopped short of death. The sheer mechanical violence of it is terrifying. The tongue tearer. This device is as brutal and direct as its name implies. It was essentially a pair of large iron tongs or shears, often with roughened or serrated gripping surfaces, specifically designed to grasp and forcibly remove a person's tongue. This horrific punishment was typically reserved for those accused of blasphemy, heresy, or sometimes for liars, or those who spoke out against authority. The message was clear: speak out of turn and you will be silenced, permanently and painfully. The process was barbaric. The victim's mouth would be forced open, the device inserted, and the tongue clamped firmly. Then, with a violent pull, or sometimes a cutting action, the tongue would be ripped or sliced out. The pain would be unimaginable, accompanied by profuse bleeding and the immediate inability to speak or swallow properly. Death from blood loss or infection was a common outcome. The act of forcibly removing a part of someone's body so essential for communication and life itself is just a profound level of cruelty. This next one, the breast ripper or iron spider in some variations, is particularly gruesome and was specifically designed for women. It was typically used on those accused of adultery, heresy, blasphemy, self-induced abortion, or other crimes deemed specific to women at the time. The device consisted of 2, 3, or 4 iron claws, often with sharp points or barbs that were designed to be clamped onto a woman's breast. These claws could be heated red hot before application, adding burning agony to the tearing. Once clamped onto the breast, the device would be pulled away from the body with force, literally ripping the breast tissue off or severely mutilating it. The pain, blood loss, and psychological trauma would be immense. It was a tool of brutal misogynistic punishment, designed not only to inflict extreme pain but also to permanently disfigure and shame the victim. The fact that such a specifically gendered instrument of torture existed is deeply disturbing. All right, the pillory. This one might seem less severe compared to some of the outright mutilation devices we've covered, but don't underestimate its horror. The pillory was a wooden framework with holes for the head and hands and sometimes feet. Those would be the stocks. Victims were locked into this device in a public place, often for hours or even days, completely at the mercy of the crowd. The primary punishment was public humiliation and shame, but it often escalated far beyond that. People in the pillory were targets for whatever the crowd decided to throw at them. Rotten food, animal dung, rocks, sharp objects. They could be spat on, beaten, and verbally abused relentlessly. While not always intended to be fatal, many died in the pillory from injuries inflicted by the mob, from exposure if left for too long, or from dehydration and starvation. It was a cruel form of social punishment where the community became the torturer. The lack of control, the helplessness, and the very real danger from an angry mob. That's a terrifying prospect. So, we mentioned the iron spider briefly when talking about the breast ripper because they're very similar and sometimes the names are used interchangeably, but it deserves its own moment of horror because it's just that awful. This device, also known as the spider, was a clawed iron instrument, often with multiple sharp prongs designed to tear flesh. While sometimes used on breasts, its application wasn't exclusively limited to that, and it could be used to shred flesh from various parts of the body. Imagine these cold, sharp iron claws, sometimes heated to intensify the pain, being dug into your skin and then forcibly ripped away. It would tear through skin, muscle, and sinew, causing excruciating pain and massive bleeding. The goal was often to inflict maximum agony and disfigurement. It's another example of how creative humans can be when it comes to inflicting suffering. The visual of a spider, something many people are already afraid of being translated into a tool of torture, just adds another layer of psychological dread. It's pure, unadulterated cruelty in metal form. The wooden horse, also known as the Spanish donkey or cavalletto equuleus, sounds almost like a child's toy, but it was a brutal instrument of torture. It consisted of a triangular or wedge-shaped wooden block with the sharp edge pointing upwards, mounted on legs like a horse. The victim, often stripped naked, was forced to straddle this sharp wooden wedge, so the point pressed directly into their perineum between their legs. This alone would be incredibly painful, but to make it worse, heavy weights would often be tied to the victim's ankles, increasing the pressure on the groin and effectively trying to split them in half from below. The pain from the sharp edge, cutting into flesh, combined with the downward pull of the weights would be excruciating. It could cause severe tearing, damage to the genitals and pelvic bones, and permanent injury. Victims could be left on the wooden horse for hours, enduring relentless agony. It's a horrifying combination of pressure, cutting, and gravitational force used to inflict suffering. Okay, this is really bad. Flaying. The act of skinning someone alive, and the flaying knife was the tool for this unimaginably horrific process. It wasn't just one specific knife design, but rather any sharp blade used for this purpose. Flaying was used as a form of execution and a terrifying method of intimidation, often reserved for the most severe crimes or for enemies in war to make a gruesome example of them. The psychological terror leading up to it, knowing what was about to happen, is almost as bad as the act itself. The process would begin with the victim restrained, and the executioner would start making careful incisions, then slowly, meticulously peel the skin away from the underlying muscle and tissue, often trying to keep the skin intact as a grotesque trophy. The pain would be beyond comprehension, a raw, searing agony covering the entire body as nerves were exposed. Most victims would die from shock, blood loss, or infection relatively quickly, but the intent was to inflict the maximum possible suffering while they were still alive. The sheer barbarity of flaying is hard to grasp. The garrote. This is a device designed for execution by strangulation, and it existed in various forms, some more merciful than others, if you can even use that word here. The basic principle involved a cord, wire, or iron collar that was placed around the victim's neck. This was then tightened by twisting a handle or a screw mechanism, slowly constricting the airway and cutting off blood flow to the brain. It was often seen as a more humane method than, say, hanging, but it was still a brutal way to die. In some versions, particularly the Spanish garrote, a sharpened metal bolt or blade was incorporated into the collar at the back. As the collar tightened, this bolt would be driven into the spinal cord at the base of the skull, severing it and causing, in theory, a quicker death. However, if misaligned, it could lead to an even more agonizing and prolonged strangulation. The feeling of being slowly choked, the desperate fight for air, the pressure building in your head, it's a terrifying way to meet your end, whether quick or not. Boiling alive, just saying those words paints a horrific picture, doesn't it? This was a method of execution where the victim was literally immersed in a large cauldron or vat filled with boiling liquid, usually water, but sometimes oil, wine, or even molten lead. The sheer, unadulterated agony of this process is almost impossible to imagine. The victim would be slowly or sometimes quickly submerged into the scalding fluid. The heat would cause immediate, catastrophic burns to the skin, then cook the flesh and internal organs. Death would be agonizingly slow if the immersion was gradual, with the victim screaming and thrashing as their body was literally cooked. Even a quick immersion would be horrific. This method was often used for poisoners or counterfeiters in some parts of Europe and Asia. The public spectacle of it, the steam, the screams. It was designed to be a terrifying deterrent. It's a primal fear, being cooked alive. Now, we talked about the breaking wheel earlier, but sometimes it was also referred to more generally as the wheel of death, and the process could vary slightly while retaining its core horror. The fundamental idea was to tie the victim to a large wheel, often a cartwheel, and then systematically break their limbs with a heavy iron bar or hammer. The executioner would aim to shatter the bones in their arms and legs, sometimes delivering a specific number of blows. After the limbs were thoroughly broken and mangled, the victim, still alive in most cases, would be left on the wheel. Sometimes their broken limbs were woven through the spokes, creating a grotesque display. The wheel would then be mounted on a tall pole, leaving the dying person exposed to the elements, birds of prey, and the public gaze. Death would come slowly, from shock, dehydration, blood loss, or further attacks. It was a horrific combination of brutal injury and prolonged public agony. The name, Wheel of Death, is chillingly accurate. Hanged, drawn, and quartered. This was the statutory penalty for high treason in England for centuries, and it is one of the most complex and gruesome execution methods ever devised. It was a multi-stage process, each part designed to inflict maximum suffering and humiliation. First, the condemned would be drawn, that is, dragged by a horse on a wooden frame or hurdle to the place of execution. This alone could cause serious injuries. Then they would be hanged by the neck, but crucially cut down while still alive. What followed was the disembowelment. Their abdomen would be cut open, and their intestines and other organs pulled out and often burned before their eyes, yes, while they were still conscious. Finally, they would be beheaded and their body divided into 4 quarters. These parts, along with the head, were often paraded through the city and then displayed in prominent public places as a grim warning. It was the ultimate degradation, designed to obliterate the traitor both physically and symbolically. The ducking stool. This one was used primarily, though not exclusively, on women, especially those accused of being common scolds, disorderly or nagging women, or more ominously, witchcraft. The device itself was a chair attached to the end of a long wooden beam, like a seesaw, often positioned on the bank of a river or pond. The accused woman would be strapped into the chair, then she would be repeatedly dunked into the cold water. Each immersion could last for a terrifyingly long time, bringing her to the brink of drowning before being pulled up, only to be plunged back in again. This was done over and over. In the context of witchcraft accusations, if she drowned, she was considered innocent but dead. If she somehow survived the prolonged ordeal, it was often taken as proof of her guilt, as no ordinary person could withstand such a trial. It was a cruel no-win situation, using the fear of drowning and the shock of cold water as tools of torture and coercion. The cat's paw. Similar to the Spanish tickler we discussed, this device was essentially a long handle with sharp, curved iron claws at the end, resembling a cat's paw, hence the name. It was used to tear and shred the victim's flesh from any part of their body. The torturer would rake these claws across the skin, ripping through layers of flesh, muscle, and sometimes scraping against bone. It was designed to inflict excruciating pain and leave deep, ragged wounds. The prolonged agony, the sight of one's own body being systematically torn apart, would be psychologically devastating. It wasn't typically designed to be instantly fatal, but rather to extract confessions through unbearable pain or simply as a sadistic punishment. The risk of infection from these deep, dirty wounds was enormous, often leading to a slow and agonizing death if the victim survived the initial torture. It's another example of a simple tool being turned into an instrument of profound human cruelty. The imagery of a seemingly innocent animal's paw being perverted into this is just unsettling. Chapter 32. The Neck Violin. A Symphony of Shame. The neck violin, or Schandgeige, shame fiddle, in German, wasn't primarily about inflicting intense physical pain, but it was a brutal instrument of public humiliation and prolonged discomfort. It consisted of two hinged wooden boards with 3 holes. The victim's neck was placed in the larger central hole, and their wrists were clamped into the 2 smaller holes on either side, forcing their arms into an awkward, prayer-like position in front of them. They were then paraded through the streets or left in a public place. Imagine being locked in this unnatural, uncomfortable posture for hours, unable to use your hands, unable to rest properly. While not as overtly violent as some devices, the strain on the neck, shoulders and wrists would become agonizing over time. More than that, it was the public shame, being displayed like a miscreant, open to ridicule, abuse and the throwing of refuse by the crowd. It was often used for minor offenses like quarreling or blasphemy, turning social punishment into a physical ordeal. The name violin is a cruel mockery of the victim's constrained posture. The tongue screw. This is another device aimed at silencing and torturing through the mouth, and it's just as awful as it sounds. It was a small, vice-like instrument designed to clamp down on and crush the victim's tongue. The tongue would be placed between 2 plates, often serrated or ridged to improve grip and inflict more pain. And then a screw mechanism would be tightened, applying immense pressure. The purpose was twofold: to inflict excruciating pain and to immobilize the tongue, preventing speech. This could be used to stop a victim from screaming during other tortures, to prevent them from blaspheming, or to try and force a confession by making any movement of the tongue unbearable. The crushing force could permanently damage the tongue, leading to difficulties with speech and eating, even if the victim survived. It's a focused, brutal attack on one of our most vital means of expression and survival. The precision of its cruelty is quite chilling. The spiked collar. This is a truly insidious device. Imagine a heavy iron collar designed to be fastened tightly around the victim's neck. But the inside of this collar was lined with sharp spikes, all pointing inwards, directly at the throat and neck. Once secured, any movement by the victim, swallowing, speaking, even breathing too deeply, or trying to lower their head to rest, would cause the spikes to dig into their flesh. It forced a horrifying stillness and vigilance. Sleep would be impossible, as relaxing could mean a spike piercing a vital artery or the windpipe. It was a tool of prolonged torment, designed to cause constant pain, fear, and sleep deprivation. Sometimes these collars were made incredibly heavy as well, adding to the strain on the neck. It could be used to restrain prisoners or as a torture method in itself, the feeling of being trapped with sharp points pressing against your throat, ready to impale you with the slightest wrong move. It's psychological torture at its finest and most brutal. Okay, this one is the stuff of legend, but there are accounts suggesting it was a real method of execution, particularly in parts of Asia, the Chinese bamboo torture. Bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants in the world. Some species can grow several inches or even feet in a single day. This torture method harnessed that incredible growth for a truly horrifying purpose. The victim would be securely tied down, suspended horizontally over a patch of young, sharpened bamboo shoots. As the bamboo grew, its strong, sharp tips would slowly, relentlessly pierce the victim's skin. Over the course of days, the shoots would continue to grow through the victim's body, impaling them from below. Can you imagine the agonizingly slow penetration, the feeling of this plant life forcing its way through your flesh and organs? It's a uniquely terrifying form of torture because it uses a natural process, something seemingly innocuous, and turns it into an instrument of slow, unyielding death. The prolonged anticipation and the gradual, unstoppable impalement is a nightmare. The iron gag, sometimes called a scold's bridle or brank, was another instrument designed for humiliation and silencing, often used on women deemed too outspoken or disruptive. It was a metal framework, like a muzzle or a mask, that was locked onto the head. The most horrific part was a plate or bit, often spiked or with sharp edges, that was inserted into the mouth and pressed down on the tongue. This metal bit would make it impossible to speak. If the victim tried to move their tongue or mouth, the sharp edges or spikes would cut into their flesh, causing pain and bleeding. It was a brutal way to enforce silence. Sometimes these gags were elaborately and grotesquely decorated to further humiliate the wearer. They would be forced to wear it in public, paraded around as a warning to others. While not always directly lethal, the constant discomfort, pain, potential for infection and profound humiliation made it a severe form of punishment. The drunkard's cloak. This one sounds almost comical, but it was a form of public humiliation used in medieval Europe, primarily for those found guilty of public intoxication. It consisted of a heavy wooden barrel with a hole cut in the top for the person's head to stick out, and sometimes holes for their arms. The offender was forced to wear this cumbersome, uncomfortable cloak and parade through the town. While not physically torturous in the same way as many devices on this list, it was deeply shaming. The weight of the barrel would be exhausting, movement would be awkward and difficult, and the wearer would be subjected to ridicule, scorn, and often pelted with refuse by the public. It was a way of making an example of someone, using social pressure and discomfort as punishment. Imagine the feeling of being trapped in a barrel, unable to move freely, while everyone around you points and laughs. It might not break bones, but it could certainly break a person's spirit. The spider web. This name evokes a sense of entrapment, and that's precisely what it was. Victims were tied spread-eagle with their arms and legs outstretched and fastened to a wall, a frame, or sometimes even trees, resembling a spider caught in its own web. In this completely vulnerable and immobilized position, they were at the mercy of their torturers. This setup was often a precursor to other forms of torture. Once secured in the spider web, the victim could be whipped, beaten, burned, or subjected to other torments. The stretched position itself would become agonizing over time, straining muscles and joints. Sometimes they were simply left in this position for extended periods, exposed to the elements, to die from dehydration, starvation, or attacks by animals. The feeling of utter helplessness, being completely unable to defend oneself while anticipating or enduring pain, would be psychologically shattering. It's a position of ultimate vulnerability designed for maximum suffering. Chapter 39, The Crocodile Tube. This sounds like something out of a bizarre horror movie, and its function is just as grim. These were typically metal tubes, sometimes serrated or ridged on the inside, designed to encase a victim's arm or leg. The tube would be made of two halves, hinged or separate, which would then be progressively tightened around the limb using screws or other mechanisms. As the screws were tightened, the tube would constrict, crushing the flesh, muscle, and eventually the bones of the trapped limb. The pain would be immense and escalating with each turn of the screw. It was similar in principle to devices like the iron boot or thumb screws, but applied to larger limbs. The goal was to inflict excruciating pain, obtain confessions, or permanently maim the victim. The visual of a limb being slowly squeezed and mangled within a constricting metal tube is just deeply unsettling. It's methodical, mechanical cruelty. Finally, we have mutilation racks. This isn't one specific device, but rather a category of torture equipment, specialized tables or frames designed for the methodical and systematic cutting off of a victim's body parts. These racks would securely restrain the victim, often spread-eagled, allowing the torturer easy access to their limbs, fingers, toes, ears, nose, or other extremities. The purpose was, quite simply, to dismember the person while they were still alive. Using various sharp implements, knives, cleavers, chisels, the torturer would proceed to remove these body parts one by one. This could be a slow, drawn-out process designed to maximize terror and agony, or a more efficient, in the most horrific sense of the word, form of execution or punishment. The blood loss, shock, and unimaginable pain would be overwhelming. These racks represent a chillingly organized approach to inflicting the ultimate physical desecration on a human being. It's a horrifying testament to the depths of human cruelty. I need a minute after all this, seriously. Okay, you guys, we made it through. And I am, emotionally drained. Seriously, my skin is crawling. 40 of the absolute creepiest, most horrific torture devices ever conceived by human minds. It's a lot to take in. And honestly, it makes you look at history and even humanity a little differently, doesn't it? The sheer ingenuity that went into creating such pain. It's profoundly disturbing. It's hard to imagine the mindset of people who not only designed these things, but used them on other human beings. But, and this is but I think it's important to remember this stuff, not to glorify it, obviously, but to understand the depths of cruelty we're capable of, so we can recognize the warning signs and, hopefully, never let things like this happen again on such a scale. It's a dark part of our collective past, but acknowledging the darkness is sometimes the only way to truly appreciate and fight for the light, for compassion, for empathy. These stories are grim, but they're also a testament to the resilience of those who endured, and a stark reminder of what we must always strive to be better than. So, if you're still here with me, thank you for sticking through this incredibly intense journey. If dark history sends chills down your spine, then share and subscribe for more creepy and jaw-dropping historical facts. Let me know in the comments which of these devices, horrified you the most, or if there are any others you know of that are just as terrifying. Stay safe out there, be kind to each other, and let's hope the only place we see devices like these in the future is in history books and museums as a reminder of a past we've left behind. I'm gonna go watch some cat videos now, bye.